If you're a parent, teacher, or school leader, and you're sick and tired of the frustration, anger, and unfair treatment of children at high risk in our public schools, then perhaps it's time for all of us to do something about it. In this podcast, Dr. Amitra Berry brings you tips, tools, strategies, and tactics to build successful solutions while touching, moving, and inspiring all of us to transform our schools so that every child thrives. Here's your host, Dr. Berry.
Hey there, Equity Warriors. Welcome to our Summer Professional Learning Series. Thanks for tuning in. Today is the last of my 10 special episodes designed to support you, whether you're a parent, caregiver, educator, leader, or supporter of your local schools. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in for these. These sessions are published on the YouTube channel with full video support. That's where you're going to find the PowerPoint. You'll have links down there for handouts and resources. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the notes to get the information that you need. Again, today's our last episode, and we're going to talk today about intersectionality. It is an episode for everyone, no matter who you are, no matter your relationship to schools, whether you're a consultant, a coach, an educator, an administrator, parent, doesn't matter. Everybody will learn from what I share today. Intersectionality is another one of those words that are being demonized for political reasons that have nothing whatsoever to do with what it really is. So, what is intersectionality then? And why all the ruckus? Let's dig in. In today's episode, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to look at two things. We're going to look at the concept of intersectionality and how it applies to K-12 education. And I'm going to work to help you recognize the importance of intersectionality in K-12 education. So let's start with the concept. To understand intersectionality, we're going to go back to its origin. The term was first coined by a legal scholar named Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. This is not something new, folks. It's been around for 3+ decades now. Intersectionality refers to the overlapping social identities that we possess, things like race, gender, social class, and they intersect to create this unique experience of discrimination and privilege. In the context of education, intersectionality plays a crucial role. It helps educators understand the diverse experiences of their students. Do you remember step 1 of the CARTI framework? It's about educators continually working to build cultural awareness and connectedness to relate to their learners in an authentic manner. It's in my first book, Affecting Change for Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Learners. So check that out. It's also intersectionality in education. Helps us understand and create inclusive learning environments that affirm, value, and respect the learners that are in our classrooms. It helps us to address systemic inequalities, when not all students receive the same resources, inequality, and more importantly, systemic inequity, where students don't receive the resources that meet their needs, and when it hinders students' academic success. And in too many cases, especially for our children of color, inequities, systemic inequities that result in discriminatory disciplinary policies and practices. Before we go on, there are 4 key concepts, 4 vocabulary words that we have to have in our understanding. These are privilege, oppression, microaggressions, and identity. So privilege refers to unearned advantages that people receive, individuals receive based on their social identity. Identity might be race, gender, or social class, or something else. It's important to recognize that privilege can often be invisible to those who have it, but it has a profound impact on the experiences of others. I did an entire episode on privilege. It's episode 18, audio channels only. Check it out for more detail. Our second vocabulary word is oppression, and that I covered in detail in episode 12 on your favorite audio podcast channel. There I define oppression as a prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment of people or control of a people. A cruel or unjust treatment or control of a people. In our context, people who are marginalized. They suffer from discrimination that is baked into our systems, into our policies, our procedures, even our methods of teaching. It's controlled by inequality in terms of who has power. You see, there's always a dominant social group or culture that is controlling. And it manifests itself in different ways. Again, episode 12, you get the 4 eyes of oppression. It's a good deep dive for you. I've talked about microaggressions in several episodes as well. I sometimes call it a death of 1,000 cuts. Microaggressions are those subtle, discriminatory behaviors, comments, actions that are directed towards marginalized individuals or groups. Sometimes, very often, these are unconscious or unintentional. That's why they're microaggressions, but they do have a cumulative negative effect on the people who are targets of those aggressions, and it contributes to feelings of exclusion, or invalidation. Identity, our last word, refers to social and personal characteristics that define who we are. If I ask you to describe yourself, who are you? How would you describe yourself? There are a lot of aspects to identity. We think always about race, gender, religion, and sexuality, but our identities are complex, they're evolving, and they're situated at the intersection of multiple aspects. And all of these things influence our experiences in the world. And it kind of looks like this. Now, if you join me for the episode on equitable grading practices, you've seen this thing. There's this thing that's called the line of domination between privilege and oppression. Remember that big idea? Intersectionality refers to the overlapping social identities we all possess that intersect to create those experiences of discrimination and privilege when it comes to how, for both educators and our learners in the classroom, how our behavior, engagement, and interaction in the school and classroom environments, how those things are perceived. So let's look at all of the biases and isms that I've chosen to highlight here. So we'll start with language bias. So above the line of domination, we have those children who speak school English, children who perhaps sound like I do, that come from homes that speak school English. And then we have those students who are what I call emergent bilingual. They may speak 2 languages. They may speak 3 languages. They may speak English and a sociocultural language like African American vernacular or Chicano English, right? But that tends to be demonized or thought of as lesser than. That is oppressed, where in our typical K-12 education in our typical schools, unless you're in a dual immersion program, that school English is what is valued. Our second ism, or first ism, second bias, is racism. We know that one. White is right, dark is not, right? So white is above the line of domination. White is privileged in American society, and learners of color are oppressed. And I don't care what metric you look at, whether it's achievement, academic achievement, disciplinary practices, learners of color are always oppressed, minimized. Racism is alive and well in our K-12 education system. The United States was built on it. It hasn't gone away. Next ism, behaviorism. Of course, well-behaved children have a privilege in the classroom, right? We hear about that all the time. Below the line of domination are disciplinary challenges. And there are a lot of reasons that children might be disciplinary challenges. I'm covering that in my upcoming book on equitable classroom practices. We don't have time to go into that here, maybe in a future episode, but that ism, behaviorism. Educationalism, above the line, the privilege goes to those who are degreed. And it's not necessarily the children, right? But their parents. Oh, their father or their mother's an attorney, they're a doctor, they're a professor, or they're this, they're that. They're higher educated, is valued and has privilege, where undereducated, high school dropout, never went to school, only ever graduated from high school. Notice how those statements are always only ever, did not. Okay, that is oppressed in our society. There is ableism, where being able-minded is valued, and our students who are on IEPs or 504s are not valued the same way. There is classism. We have our upper and upper middle class students, and then we have those who are Title I or receive free or reduced lunch, right? What's oppressed? Title I and free and reduced lunch. And then culturalism is the last one that I've chosen, and where white European culture, those behaviors, those norms, that's what's valued, where culturally diverse norms are not. And some of that comes from living in a country and a society where 80+% of our educators are white European. And so that dominant social group, that dominant culture is what is privileged, whereas our culturally diverse learners and their culture is oppressed. So why are all these things important? In our last episode, I talked about intersectionality and how it impacts grading. Here, we're going to take a broader look. Let's start with the importance of intersectionality in K-12 education. It's essential. It is essential to understand this because it helps us address the diverse needs of our students. If you've heard me speak in public, you probably, or even there's an earlier episode, and I forget that might be in episode 1, all the way back in episode 1 or 2, one of the early episodes, I talk about my experience as a child and my third grade teacher, Mrs. Gowdy. I'm not going to tell that story again. In my book, I wrote in Cultural Affecting Change, I wrote about a student who I used a different name for her because she was still in school at the time. And I called her Nasreen. This child came to me as a 6th grader after the school year had begun. And I was used to students with linguistic diversity. All my students were linguistically diverse. All my students were emergent bilingual. But she came to me speaking Urdu. At the time, I had never heard of the language. And so I knew that I would have to really pull out my language development specialist hat and tools and skills to work with a student who did not speak a language that I understood. So I couldn't scaffold for her in her primary language as I could with my students who spoke Spanish. She also came to me as a 6th grader, not having had formal instruction. You see, she came to us from Pakistan. In addition, she was Muslim and her father was an imam. So she was the only child in our school who was wearing a hijab. And that created a whole other set of circumstances for her. So here I have a 6th grade girl who is culturally diverse from every other child except for her siblings in our school, speaking a language that no one in our school spoke, not another adult, only her siblings. Went to central office, no one spoke. And this was a large urban district. No one spoke Urdu. So I had no support from the central office. On assessment, she was a beginning reader. So we had a lot of work to do for catch up. And then because of the strict religious beliefs of their family, she could not sit next to or be in a group with a boy. There's the big add-on challenge. Recognizing that, acknowledging the unique lived experience, the unique needs of our children is key in helping us address our diverse learners' needs. When we acknowledge that, we can begin to tailor our teaching approaches to support them and to create that sense of belonging in the classroom. It's a long story. It's a beautiful story that I have about her school year. It has a very happy ending, but there are a lot of things that happen that year that I share typically when I'm speaking to a group about cultural diversity, but I can't tell all of that here. It takes too long. Anyhow, these are things that we have to do. Make sure that they have that sense of belonging in our classroom, figure out what it is that they need and personalize their learning, acknowledge their experience, their lived experience. We can promote that inclusion and that equity by incorporating intersectionality, the understanding of intersectionality into our teaching practices. Hey there, Equity Warriors. I want to take a quick moment to share something exciting with you. You know how passionate I am about equity in education, right? Well, I've created a special space, a safe space, where we can dive even deeper into these crucial topics. It's our Patreon channel, and I'd love for you to join me there. Here's why it's so awesome. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll get access to exclusive content that I will not share anywhere else. I'm talking additional insights, workshops like you would get in regular professional learning sessions, resources that can really amplify your impact in education. But it's more than just extra content. By subscribing, you are directly supporting our mission. You're helping to create more valuable discussions and resources that you've come to love. You're part of the change we're making in educational systems. And let me tell you, our Patreon community, it is something special. It's a place where passionate educators and advocates can come together, share ideas, and drive real change. So if you're ready to take your commitment to educational equity to the next level, I'd be thrilled to have you join me. Just head over to patreon.com/3E podcast. That's PATREON.com/3 podcast. Remember, your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue this important work. Together, we can create the educational system all our students deserve. Thanks for considering, and now let's get back to the episode. When we do this, we can create a fair, equitable learning environment where every single child has equal opportunity to succeed. It helps us understand, it helps us identify and address those systemic barriers that can disproportionately impact marginalized students. If I think again about Nasreen and understanding what the systemic barriers were to her, I can't imagine what it would have been like for her, or I don't want to imagine what it would have been like for her to be in a classroom that did not have that sense of belonging and inclusion, an educator who desired to make sure that that child felt warmed, welcomed, and valued in a classroom. So making sure that we address those barriers, recognize them and address them, and then consider the needs of any child whose identity falls below that line of domination. If we think about behaviorism, we have all, I imagine, most of us, had some disciplinary challenges in our classrooms at some point in time. But why? Why are they a disciplinary challenge? And I always ask the question, because of an experience that I had, or multiple experiences that I had, was that behavior that was exhibited a symptom of something else? I had a teacher ask me in PD earlier this summer, and it was a white teacher who asked about her Black boys, and she talked about how they were always really loud. That's cultural. I had a student that always comes to mind, several that come to mind, but this one who was such a behavioral, of course, I got all the behavioral challenges. Don't ask me why. But he was such a challenge for all the other teachers that gave him to me, and that was fine. He was even a challenge for me, but we found out what was wrong. His behavior was simply a symptom, of ADHD/anger that he had been diagnosed with that we were ignoring, and he wasn't getting his medications. But it was also a symptom of the fact that he couldn't read. He couldn't read as a sixth grader. And so once we addressed that academic issue, he was on a path to success, and it changed his behavior completely because he felt success in the classroom. So we have to create learning environments that are equitable without bias against any learner or any of their peers. At the same time, not showing favoritism for any learner or any of their peers. When we do this, it empowers our marginalized learners. And that one child who I'm thinking about, or several of those children, but that one child I'm thinking about that was such a behavioral challenge, that's how everybody saw him. It was about meeting an instructional need, teaching him to read, and creating that desire to engage in instruction. When we first develop cultural competency, we develop empathy and understanding of the various and unique identities and lived experiences of our learners. When we create equitable learning environments and cultivate that sense of belonging, creating an inclusive classroom, we foster empathy and understanding among our learners. We do this by encouraging dialogue about their diverse experiences. In that environment, both educator and learner better appreciate and respect one another's backgrounds. Ultimately, understanding intersectionality and being mindful of the various isms and eliminating those oppressive behaviors and oppressive culture from our schools fosters strong relationships. It helps create a supportive in-school community, and some of that will carry over to the broader communities outside of school. Now, how does that happen? I'd like to believe we all want to prepare our learners to live in a diverse society, although clearly there are some entities hard at work to oppress certain groups of learners and shackle their thinking. And this is our last episode. Next episode, I begin season 2. I will be wholeheartedly laser focused on the politics of education. And I'm going to take on some of those entities that are working to oppress our children and shackle their thinking to keep them from being successful. We all have to work to keep that from happening. It is our charge as educators, as equity warriors, to develop critical thinking skills in every single child. Our kids live in, and they're going to graduate into a world of college and career that is truly global. And because of that, they need to develop some global awareness. By understanding the complexities of identity, our children, our students can become more empathetic. They can become informed citizens. They will be ready to engage actively and responsibly in a world that is increasingly interconnected. And finally, recognizing and understanding intersectionality is crucial for ensuring academic success for all our children. When we see how the isms and oppression work, we can begin to address academic achievement gaps with a lens focused on all those identities that are oppressed. If you think back to that diagram or take a look at the handout, those things that are below that line of domination, we can focus on those achievement gaps because we know who those achievement gaps have been targeted at. We can begin to address the provision gap. That is our failure as adults, as educators, to provide equitable instruction to all learners, especially those below that line of domination. And when we foster supportive learning environments, we can enhance student engagement and motivation. When we respect, value, and affirm each child, when we respect, value, and affirm all their identities and every identity, our learners feel seen, heard, and understood. And when that happens, they are much more likely to thrive academically and personally. For those of you who are school or district based, I've included a handout in the show notes to help with this activity, developing an action plan. Of course, as always, this episode is just a portion of a full workshop to develop greater understanding of intersectionality. If you're interested in the full workshop or any workshop, or getting started in this work for your school or organization, just email info@askdrbarry.com to request your complimentary consultation. Now, usually I give you a recap, but today is a little different. One, it's our last episode on the Summer PD series. But today I also want you to think about what you felt was most important. What's your key takeaway? Do you think intersectionality is important? How so? As a parent, an educator, a leader, or a service provider, it impacts your life and your work differently in different ways. So give it a little thought and then let me know what you think. You can send me a direct message by social media, preferably LinkedIn. By the way, again, if you haven't heard, I am off Twitter and on Threads, so look for me there. We put the link to social down in the notes. And that's it. Thank you for joining me today and all this summer for this professional learning series. I hope you've developed a greater understanding today of the concept of intersectionality and over the summer of all of the different ways that equity impacts instruction in K-12 education. Keep joining me every week. Remember, next episode starts a new season and we will be laser focused on the politics of education. There is a major election coming up in 2024. And we need to understand that it's not just the top of the ticket. We aren't just voting for president. I want every single equity warrior that listens to my episode to start thinking about and finding out who's running for school board, because that is something that we all need to be looking at, tuning into, and maybe some of you even running for school board. And if you run for school board, get a hold of me. I may have you on the show. I probably will have you on the show. Join me again next week. Email your questions, topics, and requests to info@askdrbarry.com. Of course, I'm going to answer those questions. I'm going to bring people on the show to help address those topics. Don't forget to look for me on Threads as @ALBerry Consulting. Now, like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications. And as always, don't worry about the things you cannot change. Change the things you can no longer accept. And I'll see you next time.
That's it for today's episode of the 3E Podcast. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 value private VIP day with Dr. Barry herself. Be sure to head over to 3epodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Dr. Barry's gift. Then join us on the next episode.